My name's John. I'm a care specialist and a research assistant here at the Realm of Caring Foundation. I'm going to be presenting today's orientation. As I was saying to everybody here physically and you guys now on the internet, it's going to last an hour, maybe longer. Very diverse subjects we're going to talk about a lot. Science, legalities, biology of the human, the plant, how these things work together. So bear with me. We're going to cover a lot. And if you have any questions, please answer them please go ahead and type them in during the presentation. We're not doing Q&A afterward, so don't feel shy. We want to answer your questions. Don't hesitate. And then right before I get started, I'm going to say one more thing. We are a nonprofit, so anybody who donated, we want to thank you very much for helping us continue to help others, especially if you donated through the Friends and Family program. You can find that on our website. It's a great way to help others. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in, and we're going to start by telling you guys just a little bit about us, how we started, our mission, our vision statement, things like that, before we dive into the good stuff. And so this is the slide that really illustrates the beginning of our organization and how we came to be. This is Zakai. He's the son of our founder, Heather Jackson. His story is very similar to that story of that little girl, Charlotte Figge. Now we're flashing back like 5 years here, so this isn't as fresh in our consciousness as we'd like it to be. But think back if you can remember, maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, you can find it on YouTube now. But that CNN documentary, Weed One, with Sanjay Gupta, about that girl, Charlotte Figge, here in Colorado. Her parents gave her cannabis. She had 300 seizures a day, and then basically went into remission. So Heather, our founder, heard about that story. Charlotte and Paige actually lived pretty close. And so she found out about Charlotte's Web. And at this point, her son was actually in hospice. He was diagnosed with a myoclonic form of epilepsy called Doza syndrome. It's quite rare. It doesn't respond to treatments well. As you can see by the slide, he failed almost 20 pharmaceuticals, autistic tendencies, some other developmental delays, 6 seizure types. In about age of 10, roughly, he was in hospice in 2012. She introduced Charlotte's Web. He had over 3 years seizure-free, developing normally. He actually goes to this daycare in the north wing of the building. So these stories of Charlotte and Zakai are sort of these first stories that hit the national consciousness, that made us aware as a nation of the potential of cannabis, and more specifically, CBD, cannabidiol, one specific component or compound of cannabis that's quite therapeutic. So Heather's son was doing great, is doing great, and she wanted to help other families spread the word about this, do research, do education, attain more knowledge. And that's why she started our foundation, the Realm of Caring Foundation. So as you can see, a quite miraculous and touching story. But we do a lot more now, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so us, Realm of Caring, Realm is actually an acronym: research, education, advocacy, and improving lives through measurable results. And as I mentioned earlier very briefly, we are a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. That's a federal status. And here's our mission and our vision statement. They're both kind of like triptych statements. They have 3 parts to them, as you can see. But we want to empower the individual to enhance their own quality of life by providing and expanding our research programs, education initiatives, and advocacy services, all of those things. Our vision is a little bit more generic, kind of where we see ourselves in 10 years. Our mission is how we carry it out. But the first thing is research, knowledge, and science. You know, we have to have this research to see what this plant does, how it works with the body. And once we have more knowledge and science and research, you know, there's going to be more acceptance. Once there's more acceptance, we'll have more access. And by access, I mean, think about it like this. How do cannabis laws work in our nation? Well, federally, cannabis is illegal. But this state, Colorado, it's legal for medical and recreational use. Same thing in California, Alaska. But you go to Ohio, they don't have recreational. Alabama has nothing. So it's a patchwork of laws. It's different. Depending upon where you live, you may or may not be able to access certain things. And we don't think that's fair. Obviously, anybody who might need a life-saving or life-changing therapy or medication should be able to access it, right? There shouldn't be legal restrictions to that, at least in my opinion, or geographical restrictions. And then you guys on the internet, if you can't hear me, if I'm not talking loud enough, you know, say something, and I can definitely speak up. And you guys can all hear me, right? Good.
Yes.
So we'll also touch briefly on our demographics. I think this is important to touch on because it's really been a radical shift. So going back to that first example, 2012, CNN, Sanjay Gupta, Weed One, the whole epilepsy, CBD, cannabis, that was where it first started, right? And so as you can imagine from that story, it really started with a few families hearing about that, moving to Colorado, and then tens of families, and then a few hundred, roughly 400. Most of those families just had children with epilepsy. So at the beginning, that was the main population we served. And at the beginning, 100%. But let's look at it today. Now, children are 3 out of 10 that we serve, and adults are about 6 or 7 out of 10. So moving from the beginning where we only serve children, now we serve more adults than children. It's a huge demographic shift. And then when we talk about specific diagnoses, we can see that for children, seizure disorder, some type of epilepsy, is still the #1 diagnosis in our client population. Closely followed by autism spectrum disorders. That's a huge range of things. We're seeing great results with that. That's part of our research project, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We're also seeing some ADHD, cerebral palsy, and cancer. And of course, there are other diagnoses mixed in there, but those are some of the biggest ones. And then as far as adult diagnoses, you see there's a big difference up at the top. Pain has eclipsed seizure disorder. And I say has eclipsed because a few months ago, we were actually serving more people with epilepsy and seizure disorders than with pain. And so what's the big deal with pain? I think there's really 2 contexts to talk about it, especially in our country. #1, baby boomers, the aging generation, a lot of people retiring, arthritis, senescence, inflammation, etc. That's a big demographic right there, and it's expressed right here, with arthritis being another pretty big population. Now, another context might be the opioid epidemic. There's a lot of talk about that in the national consciousness, the problem with whether it be prescription opioid abuse or illicit opioids. There's a great statistic that came out recently. In a lot of states that had legalized medical cannabis, opioid deaths are down like 25%. So I think people in states like this, where you have the option of cannabis, a lot of people are moving away from chronic use of opioids for pain management and moving more towards cannabis as a healthier, less addictive, more life-sustaining option. So two good contexts to talk about that one with. And then seizure disorder is still about 25%, 1 out of 4 adults, followed by cancer, a lot of different types of cancers, right? Anxiety, and then to draw a spectrum, neurological issues, anxiety, depression. Autism has some neurological components. PTSD definitely has a neurological component. MS stands for multiple sclerosis, and that's an autoimmune issue, but it also does have a neurodegenerative component, as well as Parkinson's having a neurodegenerative component. So we're seeing a few themes here. Neurological issues, maybe some autoimmune issues as well, which doesn't really get brought up as much here. Pain is another demographic, 4 big umbrellas, and cancer. So cancer, pain, autoimmune, and neurological issues are 4 huge umbrellas where we're seeing results with cannabis-based therapy. And lastly, to illustrate how our population has grown over the past 5 years or so, again, we started with a few families who moved out here, and now we serve almost 50,000 clients worldwide. I speak Spanish, so I speak to people from South, Central America, Spain, other countries as well. An interesting fact is about 1/3 of these people that we work with are using cannabis. So not everybody comes to us just to use cannabis. Some people just want to learn more about it or have resources. Not everybody is using it for therapeutic purposes. Some people just want to learn more, and that's always good. Education is great. But as you can see, there's been a dramatic demographic shift in the past 4 years. I see this continuing as research progresses and as we become more aware of all the therapeutic potentials and promises. That will keep shifting, and I see pain being a huge demographic as well, continuing to grow. And so let's talk about our services. What do we do on a day-to-day basis to actually help people? And actually, it's a lot. And it really all starts with our website. I'm not a 21st century man, but I do think the computer is important because what it really does is it decentralizes the power structure. And so what I mean to say by that is that anybody can access our website. Whatever country you live in, it's in several languages. We're able to help a lot more people that way. But that's not the end-all, be-all. We have myself as a care specialist, Dylan, who's operating, a few other people. We have live bodies and people and minds to talk to whenever you need to talk to somebody. But resources on our website, they're extensive and they are a great place to start and digest at your own pace to learn more. So a few things that we have: printable materials such as guides to using CBD or other cannabis-based oils, a document that you could print, how to talk to your doctor about using CBD or introducing it to your regimen or your child's or a loved one's regimen. We have an AED interaction chart, and we'll definitely go over that and talk about Keppra or levetiracetam. We have some educational videos, and we're working on expanding those. Our orientation, which is live on the internet and live in person most of the time. We have online forums as well, so that's great because you can connect to people who might be in a similar situation. Firsthand experience is valuable, and you can call that also anecdotal evidence, and we can counter that with our research library, which is right there, and that's just under the research tab on our homepage. Now, our research library is great for a few reasons. Number one, it's really easy to navigate, it's user-friendly, it's alphabetized. So we have anxiety, addiction, PTSD, liver, all these different sections, over 600 articles. And also to make it clear that these are scholarly articles. They're not written by Joe Schmo at a local newspaper. They're written by people who work at universities and do research. They're peer-reviewed, they've been published. Great information in that research library. We also have some monthly support groups that we do here physically. Quarterly, we have events, we do fundraisers, a golf tournament, and we're doing an obstacle course in October. Some of the products we work with, if people sign up with us and use our resources, we also get some discounts. That's nice. And on top of that, we have 2 financial aid programs. Our main financial aid program is called Realm Cares. And the way this works, we take applications quarterly, every 3 months. You can keep applying until you're accepted. There's no limit. Oh, you apply twice, that's it. No, it doesn't work like that. You can keep applying. The application is completely on our site, very easy to do, shouldn't take more than an hour really. And it's not black and white, as in you make this much, you're out, or you make this much, you're in. We take into account many factors, debt, whatever else it may be. Somebody's a single parent. So if you are somebody who's interested in requesting financial aid, or maybe if you have patients who might be able to use it, you can make them aware of this program. They can fill out that application. And at the end, upload copy of photo ID, monthly household income statements, disability statements, Social Security, pay stubs, and copy of last year's taxes so we can assess need. But that's a great program. We've had, Courtney, multi-million-dollar requests. So many people need help, and us being a nonprofit, we simply don't have the funding to help everybody. I think it's been like 10 or 15% average that we've been able to accept of our applicants. We'd love to accept more, but we need more money, right? And the Joy Fund is another great program. We just approved somebody for the Joy Fund, and they're moving to Colorado from Indiana. And it's a relocation grant, as it says, but you have to live in a non-medical state, and you have to want to move to a medical state, say from Indiana to Colorado, Alabama to California. And it's great because it's a $5,000 amount, half of which is a no-interest loan, and half of which is a grant. So you get $5,000, you pay $2,500 back. Helps you with your moving costs. And there are some people who they are going to need access to full medical cannabis, THC, CBN, other things. So that's a really great thing. Now, as you can see, we have a ton of resources, educational support for people who are members or clients. And a lot of these resources are also reflected in our physician portal. So just as we have dosing information for clients, dosing guidelines and calculators for children, for adults, for cancer, you can also find that in the physician portal. And just as we have a forum, diagnosis to diagnosis, in the client portal, we have a doctor-to-doctor forum and portal so that medical practitioners can connect with each other as well. We are working on some continuing medical education credits so that we can offer classes and webinars for doctors so that they can get education credits. And also physically, here in our building, we're developing a community center. We have a chiropractor, we have a daycare center that we opened down the hall, a massage therapist. So whatever the size of the community may be, whether it's Colorado Springs or the world at large, we're trying to help the community to the best of our ability by offering these different resources and educational opportunities and support resources. We're always trying to expand. And so, as I said, REALM was an acronym, and the R stands for research, and that's one of the most important things we do. Going back to that triptych statement, knowledge and research drives everything. So we have multiple research studies that we're doing. I'll go over the side projects really quickly. The metabolite study we did with hemp-based products, CBD oil, that are low THC, so low that they're considered dietary supplements, and you can buy them over the counter. and we were trying to inform drug testing levels for sports. So NFL, NHL, Major League Soccer, mixed martial arts, all these different sports have different standards for what constitutes a positive drug test. And so we did some data we pulled, and we're seeing, well, if people are taking certain products, are they going to come up positive? Yes or no? At what level are they going to come up positive? So to inform these future drug testing programs and services and make them more uniform, if that makes sense. And to be honest, people were coming up positive for THC at certain levels, even with products that can be purchased completely legally with no prescription or medical marijuana recommendation. Even if you're using hemp milk and hemp lotion and ice cream and things like that, it is possible to test positive for THC. Wow. Even when it's that low of an amount. Sometimes habitual intake is necessary because it's small amounts, but it builds up in the system. At Denver Children's, we were enrolling for a study done by a Dr. Ma for Dravet syndrome and Charlotte's Web. The current NFL player study, I think we're going to switch that to the mixed martial arts realm. If nobody was aware, in MMA, they just legalized CBD for use by all of their athletes. So that makes it a little bit easier. Whereas with the NFL, there's a bit more of a stigma associated with cannabis use. And a lot of these players in the NFL, they don't want to speak out about it, even though they may be current users. And then our former professional athlete study, that's open to people who played football, rodeo, downhill snow sports, all those things, any type of contact sport. These are people who may have been exposed to TBIs and might develop CTE, which if you've seen that movie with Will Smith, Concussion, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, great big word, hard to say, so CTE, right? But these guys are filling out questionnaires monthly. Some of them are taking CBD. We're tracking their progress and seeing CBD helping these guys who might have been exposed to traumatic injuries with the brain. Is it not helping? What's going on here? Are they having some progress? So that's a great study as well. And another thing to note is that all these studies are observational. They're not clinical or double-blind, placebo-controlled. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is funding. Those are extremely expensive studies. You can really only afford those if you're a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company. And number two, legal restrictions. Cannabis is Schedule I in this country, meaning, and if you guys don't know what Schedule I means, it's a system for classifying drugs, pharmaceutical drugs as well, in this country based upon their medical use and the amount of risk in that use. And so a Schedule I substance is supposed to be the most dangerous substance known to man. Included in Schedule I are things like heroin and LSD. Marijuana is also Schedule I. Interesting to note that nobody has ever died from using marijuana in the history of humanity, whereas there's probably several people in the past 20 minutes who died from opioid overdoses. So, sorry for that tangent. Our main research project, the Observational Research Registry. This is the largest project of its kind in the United States. It's a vanguard project. We have over 1,000 people who are participating, and I really think the great thing about it is that it's open to anybody. Any age, any diagnosis or condition, whether you're using cannabis or not. So as you can imagine, we have a lot of data, a wide and deep breadth of data to compare cannabis and non-cannabis users, different ages, different demographics, different diagnoses. Is there a difference between them? Well, we're going to see. We're going to publish this data very soon. And we have pulled out 2 cohorts so far. We have a large group of people in this study who have epilepsy and about 100 people. I think the epilepsy group might be 300 or 400 roughly, and the autism group is roughly 100. I presented some of the autism data at a couple conferences in the past year or two, and we're seeing statistical significance in almost all measures where cannabis users are doing better than non-cannabis users, especially when we're talking about autism, the area of economic impact. And so that's another great part of this project is we have an economic impact measurement. So what that means is, how often are you going to the hospital? Outpatient, inpatient, emergency room visits, medication, things like that. And we're seeing that those kids with autism who are using cannabis, they're missing less days from school. They're going to the doctor less. And so with this economic impact portion, we're trying to present this information to insurance companies and make them see that possibly if they cover cannabis as a for-profit business, they might save themselves some money. And in turn, they might help some people achieve a better level of health. So, and there are some vanguard developments. It hasn't really been public, but we've had some insurance companies reach out to us who have been interested in covering cannabis. I think there's also a story like that going on in Canada. But anyway, we're working with some professional researchers, so we house these questionnaires on our website, but they were actually designed by the researchers at University of Pennsylvania, Johns Hopkins, VA Palo Alto, and a few others. And so we have a general questionnaire, a PTSD, multiple sclerosis, an epilepsy, and a chronic pain questionnaire. So depending upon your diagnoses, you might just do a general or you might do several. And you're doing these questionnaires every 3 months to track your progress. Maybe somebody stopped using cannabis. Okay, well, what's happened after that? Maybe they started using cannabis in the 3rd month. Okay, well, what's happened after that? It's a very detailed project, wide breadth, like I said, of data. We're using many common data elements and validated measures, and those are basically research questions that are designed by researchers in the proper manner, if that makes sense, so that we can compare the research to other research projects. So quite extensive, but very easy to participate. You just do a few questionnaires every 3 months quarterly. And there are some prizes as well for people who stay up to date. So we've gotten some promising data from this, and we are going to publish later this year. It's been going on for about 2 years so far, so we've been gathering data for a while. It's going to be very interesting to see. As I said, we've already seen statistical significance in our epilepsy and autism populations, but we have a lot more populations as well. So that's a great project, and anybody who's interested in contributing to science, I encourage you to join that. It's very simple. Just go on our website under research to participate, click on that, make a client account, and you can log in, take advantage of our resources, and participate in this research. It's great. You're helping other people as well. But that's not the whole part about research. Another way to conceptualize research is, what research am I going to do myself to educate my own self as a person? And so as you see, there's a lot of different terms listed here as reported benefits or properties of cannabis. Anti-tumoral, anti-degenerative, neuroprotectant, antioxidant, those are 2 nice ones. Antipsychotic, anti-anxiety, anti-inflammatory, antiemetic, which is kind of like anti-nausea or anti-vomiting, and anti-convulsant, less seizures. So there's a lot of different reported effects of cannabis and some of the compounds in the plant. And I always encourage an individual to do their own research and make their own educated opinions. And here are some great resources to do that. And these are strictly scientific resources. Again, these are scholarly articles. So a great place to start is our research library. Again, it's alphabetized, over 600 articles, a lot of different sections, super easy to navigate. Also, as I was discussing the legalities and the restrictions into research into in this country, due to the scheduling of cannabis, this is great for international research. Cannabis-med.org, excellent website. They have a lot of research coming out of, Europe and Israel. And we'll touch on Israel in a moment. If you guys didn't know, Israel is the most advanced nation when it comes to medical cannabis. If you go to Israel today, you go to the cancer ward, the pediatric cancer ward, and they're giving cannabis oil to those kids. You go and visit the veterans who are in a PTSD ward, and they're giving cannabis to those veterans. They have an excellent medical cannabis program that's light years ahead of any state in this country. And then lastly, there's pubmed.gov. That's attached to our National Institute of Health website. That's great. If you go there, there's a search box. If you just type in cannabis, you'll get over 17,000 articles. And it also allows you to do an advanced search and input 2 terms, say cannabis and arthritis, or CBD and arthritis, or epilepsy and CBD, whatever you may want, a diagnosis and cannabis or one of the compounds in the plant, and it will allow you to do a more specific search and narrow it down. So that's a really powerful resource as well. And as far as the research goes, I'll give you guys one more hint. When you're reading these articles, like I said, they're scholarly articles, so some of them are 50 or 70 pages, and they're full of charts and jargon in terms that you're going to have to look up. You'll spend 5 hours wading through an article, and you get a headache, and you'll crumple it up and throw it out, and then punch a wall or something. Shortcut, read the introduction, skip all the way to the end, and they use usually one of 4 terms. Conclusion, discussion, review, or summary, pretty common, and that's usually on the last page, a paragraph or a few, and it gives you all the takeaway without the headache. So that's going to save you guys some time.
A suggestion that when you're reading one of those articles, and it's really interesting to you, but you don't have the time or the concentration to do it, just copy it from the internet, plug it into a Word document. You can read it at your leisure at any time. And it's right there. And you don't have to stay connected to the internet for multiple hours.
There you go. And so if you guys didn't hear on the internet, the comment was, if you don't have time to read an article, you can download it into a Word document on your computer and then not have to be on the internet the whole time. So that's another good way to do it. Yeah, go ahead and download it and save it for later. But now we're going to touch on some legislative efforts, which I touched on briefly, but we'll get into a little bit more depth. So let's start with this chart. This isn't even up to date. So let's go to the next one and look at the up-to-date one. So what I want to illustrate here, and let's flash back to that other one. I think I want to add another slide here. Let's flash back 20 years. 20 years ago, this map was all gray, except for California. California had medical cannabis, and that's it. So in a period of roughly 20 years, give or take, now most states in the union have some type of law regarding either A, medical cannabis, or B, at least CBD. There's been a lot of progress made. Even in the last few months, you see there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 or 7 states that are gray, and now we have 4 that are gray. But there are some catch-22s here, so let's go over a few of these different states. And we'll start with the color. So gray states have no laws regarding CBD or medical cannabis. The light yellow, those have CBD laws, a lot of the South, right? Any states that are kind of light green, like grass green, they have medical cannabis. But here's the problem. So let's talk about Arizona and New Mexico. You can go get medical cannabis there today. Ohio, you can't get medical cannabis today. Pennsylvania, I think they just opened their dispensaries. Like we said, West Virginia, they pass medical cannabis, but if you saw it, it doesn't go into effect until 2020. So there are some states that have really restrictive laws, like say Minnesota, not a lot of people can access it, you don't have a lot of qualifying conditions. Or say like Illinois, where they want you to give probably a few $1,000s a year just for you to have your prescription or recommendation. Compare that to Colorado, you pay less than $100 a year for your renewal. So there are some states that have cumbersome or restrictive laws, whether it's qualifying condition or a cost of entry into the medical cannabis program. Not every program is created equal. Some are better than others. And then we have the dark green states that have CBD and medical cannabis, and a lot of these states also have recreational. But as you can see in summary, it's a patchwork of laws. So whatever state you live in, it's great to be aware of the laws in your state. With CBD products that are also defined as hemp-based dietary supplements, those can be shipped to all 50 states based on federal laws. And that's based on THC percentage. However, a state law might conflict. So whatever state you live in, you need to make sure you're also state compliant. You say, how am I going to do that? Here's some resources for legalities. We have medicalmarijuana.procon.org. That's great because that site has a summary of medical marijuana laws by state and CBD laws by state. Great place to get started. And Americans for Safe Access Now, safeaccessnow.org. They are another nonprofit that is organized in the cannabis realm. I think they have doctor and lawyer referrals and some other things like that, I believe. So that's a good resource as well. And then we'll skip back one and touch a little bit on the different state CBD laws. And so here we have a list of different states. Some of them you might find surprising that pass CBD, like Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas. And Oklahoma just passed medical cannabis a few days ago, if nobody knew that. Kentucky, that's where I'm from, Mississippi, Iowa. But as you can see over here, some did or did not limit the amount of THC. Just because your state has a CBD law doesn't mean it's a good law or doesn't mean it's the same as your neighbor's law. So again, make sure you're aware of what your state laws are and try to be state compliant as well as federally compliant. Do you want to take a break? No. All right, does anybody have any questions? We're about to shift gears here and go into plant biology. So if you have any questions about anything, especially anything we've already covered, go ahead and type those in. And I'm going to get, yes ma'am?
Can you go back to that last slide so I can write down those websites for the legal resources?
Course.
Thank you.
Yep, and we're going to pause right here for a second so we can get some of these resources written down. Anybody else? Questions at the moment? Backwards. All right, so now we're going to start getting into plant biology, and again, ask questions if there's anything. So I'm going to start with two terms, CBD and THC. Maybe some of us are familiar, maybe some of us aren't. But I'll start explaining it like this. Cannabis is a plant, hemp is a plant, it's the same plant that produces hundreds of therapeutic compounds, many. CBD and THC are the two main ones. So a way to think of this in an analogy or a metaphor is CBD and THC, if this was all a movie, these are the starring actors. But there's a lot more that make an ensemble cast. But these are two important guys, starring actor, starring actress. But they're different. So a lot of people know THC as the part of the cannabis plant that gets you high. It is psychoactive because it binds to CB1 receptors in your brain, in your central nervous system. It has a specific mechanism of action, like a drug. Not to say it's not therapeutic, it does have many therapeutic and medicinal properties, but it is psychoactive and has a specific mechanism of action. You can get a tolerance to THC or get downregulation of your receptors if you're dosing too high. CBD is a bit different. It doesn't act like a drug in a specific manner. It doesn't have just one mechanism of action. To date, it seems like scientists have discovered over 50 mechanisms of action. So another way that we talk about CBD and THC and compare them is we call THC monogamous and we call CBD promiscuous. It interacts with a lot of different systems in our body, whereas THC focuses more on the CB1 receptor. So you can see where that comes from. Another way that researchers have talked about CBD is they call it a Boy Scout molecule, meaning it does the right thing in the right place at the right time. It's kind of like a smart molecule. It helps different systems get into balance or homeostasis. I also like to think of CBD as a Swiss Army knife for the body, because a Swiss Army knife does a lot of different things. So does CBD. Whereas THC, if we want to use I guess a military analogy, it's more like a sniper rifle, if that makes sense. And the CBD could be more like a buckshot or a shotgun. I like examples and metaphors and analogies. I think it helps us understand this because it's very complex science, but we can also boil it down and think about it in very simple ways to understand it. And so like I was saying, CBD and THC, the major cannabinoids, the starring actors, the two compounds that you find at the highest levels in the plant. And that's why we know more about them than anything else, is because they're found at higher levels. So it's easier to pull them out of the plant, isolate them, and say, well, what is this THC doing? What is this CBD doing? We can study it. Now, as you see this chart, there's a lot of other compounds listed, right? Maybe around 15 or 20. These are all also cannabinoids. And again, major cannabinoids, I call CBD and THC. All of the other ones are minor cannabinoids. And as I said, we have about 15 right here. I want to make this point very clear that there are roughly 100 cannabinoids. So this is not an exhaustive chart. And there are so many of these compounds that really people haven't even isolated all of them yet. We haven't even named all of them yet. And that's just the cannabinoids. There's still a few hundred more compounds in this plant. So it's extremely complex. How does this work in the body when we have 500 compounds being added at once? They interact with each other, they complement each other. It's a very complex biochemical message or picture or interaction, of course. But let's talk about this in a few other contexts. So you see a lot of different compounds made by the plant. And this is the plant's life stage as well. So at the top you see all of those letters have A's at the end. Those compounds are acidic compounds. So THCA is tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. CBGA is cannabigerolic acid. CBDA, cannabidolic acid. And they're at the chart, at the top of the chart where it says raw, because the acidic forms of these compounds are found in a growing plant, a living plant, a fresh plant, a live plant, not old, dried cannabis flowers. Then it starts a chemical process. Time, heat, light, oxygen turns these acidic compounds into decarboxylated compounds. And so this acid group is a carboxylic acid. So with heat, light, oxygen, time, you can remove that carboxylic acid, decarboxylate it, and then you have these forms. If you take it a step further, oxidation, you can get some of these forms. So THC oxidizes into CBN, and THC also oxidizes into delta 8 THC. Here's another way we can talk about this chart, legalities. So basically all of these compounds, except CBD, are only really going to be available through a medical marijuana program in certain states. But because CBD is kind of left out of the definition of legalities, you can have a rich CBD product in whatever state you want. But if you want to go buy THCV or THCA or CBN, you're going to have to get that in the medical state. And some of these, another way to talk about it, I love this chart. There's so many different contexts. Let's talk about therapeutic properties. So when we look at these lists, basically the two longest lists are THC and CBD. And that goes back to they're found at higher levels, they're easier to pull out and study by themselves. We also have a pretty good list for CBC and CBG and a few of these other ones, so you see research is ongoing, but then you have this one, CBL, cannabicyclol. There's nothing known about this. We haven't been able to pull out enough of the plant to study it and see what it does. And then, again, this is about 15 and we have 100 more of these to go through. So, again, very complex. And then we can talk about it in another context. So, psychoactivity. THC gets you high. None of these other compounds really get you high. One semi-exception is CBN. So again, THC oxidizes into CBN, cannabinol. Cannabinol is supposed to bind to CB1 receptors with about 1/10 the potency of THC. So it binds, technically it could be psychoactive. It has some sedative properties as well, but it's nowhere near as powerful as THC. It's really just a mild sedative. So when people talk about adding CBN to their cannabis regimen, these might be people with sleep issues or insomnia. Those are the two main indications so far for the use of CBN. And it really doesn't even list them here. It lists a few other things, but analgesic and anti-insomnia. There we go. I don't know why I didn't see that. And then there's also THCA. So let's make an example out of that. So CBN and THCA both closely structurally related to THCA or THC. Even though they don't get you high, the structure is so close that you can't have it outside of a medical marijuana program. And for THCA, as you see, antispasmodic, for people who are having myoclonic and muscle jerk seizures, we've seen THCA be a valuable addition sometime. And here's one last context that I'd like to talk about this. When I talk about attempting cannabis therapy, I view it as a spectrum. And I think most people will see at least some type of results from a high CBD, low THC product, something maybe like Charlotte's Web, for example. It's not going to be 100% adequate for everybody, but a lot of people at least get some result off that. And so I think that's a very great place to start. It's also accessible. It's benign, not a lot of people get side effects at all, and there's a good chance for relief, at least to an extent. So you can start with a high CBD, low THC. You can go about your daily business, you're not going to be high, and it gives a lot of people results in different areas. Now, after you give that a trial period, if that's not working, based on your issues, maybe we can think about adding something or switching to something else, whether that might be THCA for somebody with myoclonic epilepsy, or CBN for somebody with sleep or anxiety or pain issues. So when we talk about cannabis-based therapy, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no blanket statements. It's an individualized therapy. And just because you've tried one cannabis or one cannabis product doesn't mean it will never work for you. These are individual genetic organisms. You take these 500 compounds, and these different strains or cultivars, we can have different therapeutic profiles. And somebody might respond better to one therapeutic profile than the other. So there's a lot of, not to say trial and error or whack-a-mole, but again, moving from one end of the spectrum to the other, if that makes sense. So I think we've spent enough time on this chart. Yes, ma'am?
Where it says bone stimulant, can you give an example of that, what that would be?
Yes, I can actually give you a personal example.
Okay.
So I myself am involved in my life in some extreme sports, sometimes skateboarding, snowboarding, and I've broken several bones in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody's ever broken a bone here, they usually say for the most part 6 to 8 weeks in a cast. I've gotten out of a cast in a month before using cannabis while my bones were broken, putting salves on and stuff like that. Because one time I was actually out of a cast and had pins in my knuckles, so I could actually put something on. That's my experience. But I think what that means, and where did you see it? So THCV, bone stimulant.
It's like 3 different types.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And that's another thing that we can talk about is a lot of these properties overlap and complement. They work together again. But yeah, bone stimulant is something you will see quite often. So a couple contexts are, say somebody, an elderly woman dealing with osteoporosis, that could be helpful. And basically it goes back to, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but I want to answer the question. We have an endocannabinoid system, and it's responsible for maintaining the balance in basically all of our body and our organs, including bones. And so it can help if you have bone deficit or a broken bone.
Cool.
There's a lot of interesting properties on this list, right? Neuroprotective, anti-ischemic, which might have to do with stroke. And we see bone stimulant here too on CBD. And if I didn't go over the V ones, that would be like CBD is cannabidiol. This one is cannabidivarin, an analog or a homolog. So a lot of different. You can even see antifungal and antibacterial. So a lot of different properties, right? Very interesting. But let's keep moving on. So we've covered major cannabinoids, CBD and THC, and some minor cannabinoids, all of those ensemble actors that are also present. And we said this cannabis plant has several hundred compounds, right? Those cannabinoids are roughly 100. And so terpenes are another big class of compounds that are found in the cannabis plant. Terpenes could also be found in wine. So here's a comparison between the wine-loving crowd and the cannabis-loving crowd. You know, people who are sommelier or whatever, they swirl the wine and they sniff it and say an oak flavor and a vanilla and a little hint of cherry on this nice, beautiful Pinot Noir. With cannabis, you have some of these same compounds, these flavor compounds that are found in nature in multiple plants. Let's go over them because they're very important. They're therapeutically active. We have pinene. And a lot of these you can just tell it by the name what kind of plant it comes from, right? Pine, pinene, pine needles, coniferous trees, like up in the mountains. Linalool is found in lavender. Beta-caryophyllene is found in black pepper. This is a really important one. Beta-caryophyllene, some people will call it a dietary cannabinoid. It also can be found in like copaiba oil, essential oils. Beta-caryophyllene is an extremely important terpene because it acts directly on your endocannabinoid system, the CB2 receptors throughout your body. And so there's actually an African bush medicine. They use not maybe black pepper, but certain other types of pepper that are very closely related, and salves and other types of healing potions. I think salve is the best word, where they actually put it on the skin of the broken bone and it helps heal because it's targeting those CB2 receptors that are activated when you have a broken bone. And then we also have myrcene, which is another terpene found in hops and also in mangoes. And if you guys aren't familiar with hops, you know, hops flavor beer, right? It's very interesting to note the scientific name of hops. Hops is Cannabis humulus, and I don't like the term marijuana because it's a slur, but just to differentiate, marijuana is Cannabis sativa. So these share the same genus, but are different species. So very closely related. And there's a book I'll mention at the end, but reading this book, when you go back into archaeobotany, where they're studying ancient plants, the researchers can't even tell the difference between hops pollen and cannabis pollen from 10,000 years ago. It looks so similar. Very closely related plants. But myrcene is a sleep aid and a muscle relaxant. And then lastly, we have limonene, which you can guess limes, found in citrus fruit, right? And now I'm going to cover what I consider a controversial topic, the whole indica versus sativa binary. Is anybody familiar with that? No? Let's explain it. So when we talk about cannabis, and I think these are more colloquial and recreational terms, an indica is supposed to be a type of cannabis structurally that's short and bushy, and the effects of it would be sedative, a nighttime smoke to calm you down. Whereas a sativa is supposed to be taller, lankier, more like a Christmas tree, and have more of a daytime effect, stimulating, euphoria, creativity. That's a binary that's not accurate genetically. You'll see it all over in dispensaries and medical states, but really, truly, the genetic differentiation in the cannabis gene pool, it's too diverse to say this is an indica or this is a sativa. Really, all strains today are hybrids. For the most part. And so here is where I also make a comparison to canines. Cannabis is just like dogs. We've bred dogs for hundreds, if not thousands of years to show traits that we want. We've done the same thing with cannabis. We bred sub-cannabis to make clothing and fiber. We bred some for the drug content, or the therapeutic or medicinal content, however you want to put it. And at the end of the day, we're also going to touch on marijuana versus cannabis versus hemp. What's the difference? Biologically, it's all the same plant. But think about it like dogs. We bred this plant to look differently, to behave differently, for different reasons. But at the end of the day, they still all crossbreed into the same thing, even though they're used for different reasons. And so that was a little bit of a tangent. I think it was a good education. But back to terpenes. So these are, again, like the ensemble compounds, the background, the helpers. And let's go back to that indica and sativa, where the sativa is supposed to be a daytime high, and the indica is supposed to be a nighttime high. And again, as you can tell, I'm not big fans of those terms. Again, I don't think it's accurate. But when we're really discussing the effects of a strain of cannabis, especially if it's rich in THC, whether it's going to be stimulating or sedating, the terpenes determine that. So with limonene, it has anti-anxiety, antidepressant. And just think about how when you smell citrus, how does it make you feel? Awake, invigorated. Same thing with pinene, with the nimriate, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory. Those would be a couple terpenes that you might associate more with sativas. Whereas something like linalool and myrcene, with the sleep aid and muscle relaxant properties and the anti-anxiety, anticonvulsant, anesthetic, those are all calming properties, right? So if it wasn't indica, you would expect it to have higher levels of myrcene or linalool. But then again, everything's a hybrid, so you'll have strains that will have myrcene and pinene, linalool and limonene, so it's a mix. And so to summarize, not a huge fan of that indica-sativa binary. If you want to learn more about the genetics of cannabis, there's a great company and a great website. It's called Phylos, P-H-Y-L-O-S, Bioscience. Phylos, P-H-Y-L-O-S, Bioscience. They have a 3D interactive galaxy map of the cannabis genome. And so it kind of looks like a star system, if you were looking up in the sky, where every star is a point in the cannabis genome or a different cultivar or a strain. If you look at that map, it will help you understand the diversity of the cannabis gene pool. But let's continue. So here's what I've kind of been hinting at the whole time, but I haven't really said it or come out. I've been beating around the bush, but now I'll say it. So the entourage effect, also called the synergistic effect, the ensemble effect. I like to picture it in my mind by thinking about a symphony, where in the plant you have 100 cannabinoids, 200 terpenes and flavonoids, phenols, other compounds. They're all working together to create a beautiful therapeutic profile, just like all of these musicians are playing together to create beautiful music, right? And so I'm going to read this verbatim. Phytocannabinoid, CBD, THC, CBN, and terpenoid, limonene, myrcene, all of those things, content offer complementary, they work together, pharmacological activities. They may strengthen and broaden their clinical applications and improve the therapeutic index of cannabis extracts containing THC or other base phytocannabinoids like CBD. Psychopharmacological and dermatological indications show the greatest promise. And so there's a comparison we can make here too. It's also called whole plant, meaning we take products that utilize all of the compounds in the plant. Now, opposed to this is the isolated compound model. So maybe some of you guys listening on the internet are aware, maybe some of you guys here are aware, that the FDA just approved a drug for epilepsy. It's called Epidiolex, and it's basically CBD. That's all it is. But with Epidiolex, because it's just CBD, we don't have any of these terpenes or flavonoids. We don't have these other cannabinoids there to help. If we have just CBD, we're going to have to dose a lot higher, more aggressively. We're going to see more side effects possibly, and not everybody's going to respond as well when we don't have all these complementary helpers. Another way to think about it is, think of a hockey game or a sports game. If half your team is in the penalty box, how are you going to win? Or if your LeBron James didn't beat the Warriors, right? It was a good one. LeBron James won one guy, big star, right? Really big guy. But the Warriors won because they had a team. So that's another way to conceptualize the whole plant versus the isolated compound model. I hope that was fun. And so we've covered biology of the plant a little bit, and I think it really is kind of mirrored and reflected in the biology of the person. So here's how I'll start out saying it. In the plant, we have these hundreds of compounds, all different, but working together in conjunction. We also have this in our body, where we have, number one, chemical messengers. We have receptors that are like doors or keys to the lock, where these messengers are the keys in opening the door, and these receptors are the doors. And then there's also a whole background of compounds that are going to make the keys and take away the keys, open and close the doors, enzymes that break down these messengers and also create them. And what we're really talking about here is what's called the endocannabinoid system. That's our body's system. Cannabis just acts on it. And so how did we discover it? What's this whole thing about? And here's where we go back to Israel. Israel's been studying cannabis since the 1960s. And in the early 90s, a team at Hebrew University used cannabis compounds, THC and CBD, to discover that we actually have our own active system. So we didn't know about this system until we used these plant compounds. We put them in a body and said, well, this plant compound is binding to this receptor here and this receptor here. Why is it doing that? And then we found out that we have all these chemicals in our body that also bind to these receptors. And so for some reason, we don't know why. It's very miraculous, but this plant just mimics our body's system very closely. That's why our body takes it, as if it was our own chemical messengers. And so maybe you guys are familiar with other chemical messengers in the brain, like serotonin and dopamine. These are kind of the same. So we have anandamide. That was one of the first ones discovered. THC is thought to mimic anandamide. Then we have 2-arachidonylglycerol, 2-AG. Somebody can say that at the end. Make sure you get
how long did it take you?
a while, right? Yeah, 2-AG. CBD is thought to mimic 2-AG. Then there's N-arachidonyl dopamine, NADA, 2-arachidonylglycerol ether, noliden ether, and more. And so we're seeing this entourage effect in our body. We have a lot of chemical messengers, and there's also the doors, the receptors. And so again, look at this, think of these messengers, or the plant messengers, THC, CBD, as keys that unlock doors in our body, if that makes sense, or shut them, depending upon what needs to be done. But we have two main receptors. The CB1, like I said, THC binds to CB1. It's mostly found in your brain, your central nervous system. It is also found in your body, but not as much as CB2. So CB2, found all throughout your body. Immune system, GI tract, peripheral nervous system, heart, liver, bone, productive organs, everywhere. It's also found in your brain, but not as much as CB2. So CB1, CB2, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? We still have some 2 in the brain, still have some 1 in the body, but not as much as the opposite. Another important thing to note is that there's not just 2 receptors. Those are the first 2 they've discovered. There's a lot of discussion now about a cannabinoid CB3 receptor and other G-coupled protein orphan receptors. So these are other receptors that we've found in the body. We don't know what they do. And so they're thinking maybe these receptors work with the endocannabinoid system. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is just like the research into cannabis, the research into our bodily system that cannabis acts on is ongoing. We're learning a lot at this point, especially with the international research that's happening. And then so also we have a quote here by Italian researcher Vincenzo Di Marzo, and he says, "The endocannabinoid system is essential to life, and it relates messages that affect how we relax, eat, sleep, forget, and protect." Very important. A lot of people probably haven't heard of this system because it's not taught in medical schools. Your nurses aren't learning about it. Your doctors are not learning about it. 90s is still relatively new for medical discoveries. I think this is just beginning to be introduced into the medical curriculum of our higher level universities in the United States, and that's a good thing. Because when I boil this all down and put it as simply as I could, I say that the endocannabinoid system is your master regulatory system. It interacts with all of your other systems to keep them in balance, as you can see by the expression of the receptors and the messengers. And remember that there's a lot going on here. So we didn't even talk about the enzymes that make and degrade these, but we have multiple receptors, we have multiple messengers, we have multiple enzymes. And so this guy, Vincenzo Di Marzo, we saw a lecture from him, and he is now kind of like genome, if you've heard the term genome, that describes the human genetic code, how it's vast. He coined the term endocannabinoid dome, which is this collection of receptors, messengers, and enzymes that break down and synthesize those messengers. So it's a complex system, and it's mirrored in the person and in the plant. Are you guys, is that making sense? Are you guys getting that? Okay. It can be hard to describe. So now we have a brain scan. And this brain scan is lit up where we have cannabinoid receptors, and it's dark where we don't have cannabinoid receptors. So there's two specific areas that I'm going to talk about. It will make two examples and put it into perspective. The first place we're going to talk about is our brainstem. And as you can see, that's pretty dark, right? Pretty black. We don't have a lot of cannabinoid receptors there. And what does our brainstem do? I'll ask it. Does anybody know?
Feels like breathing.
Autonomic nervous system, breathing, things that you're not always thinking about.
Right.
Heartbeat, respiration rate, yeah, GI functions, other things. We don't have cannabinoid receptors there, but guess what? You do have opioid receptors there. So that's why when somebody takes an overdose of oxycodone, they stop breathing and die, because it suppresses the breathing on the brainstem. You don't have cannabinoid receptors there. So no matter how much cannabis you smoke, if we're talking about THC-rich cannabis or CBD, whatever, you'll fall asleep. You'll wake up, you'll be fine. You're not going to kill yourself. Now, on the opposite end, really bright part of the brain, the hippocampus. Hippocampus is part of our brain that's really closely involved in memory, deletion of traumatic memories, retention of good memories. And so that's bright. We have a lot of cannabinoid receptors there, especially CB1. So that could be a structural explanation as to why there's a lot of vets or other people with PTSD who are seeing results with cannabis. We have these receptors in our memory center. These guys have traumatic memories that they can't delete, they can't extinct, they can't get away from them. And so cannabis is helping. And also, when you talk about THC, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but THC actually suppresses dream recall. So these guys who are having these horrible dreams and they're flashing back in their dream to, when they're a foxhole in Vietnam or in a sand trap in Iraq, well, if they're using THC, it's actually going to suppress that. And they're maybe not going to wake up in the middle of the night and choke their partner who's right next to them. So a lot of different benefits. But that makes sense, right? Structural explanations for why cannabis may or may not do something in a certain area. And then it's also good to cover the neuron death triad. This is important because this is happening in all of us right now. The simplest way to describe this is senescence, the aging process. We're all getting older every minute. A more extreme way to describe this process, or a more extreme example, would be an epileptic seizure, an anxiety attack, or a bruise or a broken bone as well. So it really starts with ROS, some type of stress, or broken bone, bruise, some type of event that causes some anxiety, or some type of seizure trigger. The stress, especially in the central nervous system, leads to excitotoxicity. So your nerves are firing too much, you have too much glutamate, your ion channels are kind of out of whack. Nerve signals are firing too fast. And then that leads to neuronal inflammation, or in the peripheral system, just inflammation. And then more stress, more toxicity, more inflammation. So it's a vicious cycle. But we see on the left-hand side, these are also terms that you'll find in our research library. So on all three levels, cannabis has properties to reduce the rapidity of this cycle. So first, antioxidant, neuroprotectant, and promotes neurogenesis. You can find all of those terms in our research library. As well, CBD modulates CB1 and glutamate calcium channels, and we'll talk about that here in a slide or two. And then cannabis compounds, many of which, as you saw on that slide with all the minor and major cannabinoids, they have anti-inflammatory properties, and CBD modulates CB2 receptors in the immune system. And when we're talking about immune disorders, a lot of them have an inflammation component, and in fact, a lot of diseases have an inflammatory component. There's even some people who theorize that inflammation is the root of all disease. I don't know if I would agree with that, because bacteria obviously cause disease as well. And here's where we're going to jump into some very scientific stuff. But good nonetheless. So here, specifically, we're only talking about the mechanisms of action of CBD. And that goes back to the beginning. Remember I said there's over 50 mechanisms of action. We're not going to cover all of them here, but we'll cover some basic ones, especially in the central nervous system. So first of all, CBD, I like to use the term regulator, modulator, adaptogen, because again, it's a smart molecule. It doesn't just move one way. It moves you back to the center towards balance.
You got a question on that?
Yeah, we have a question.
Can CBD help with the hippocampus part of the brain since they cannot take THC?
The question is, can CBD help with the hippocampus part of the brain because they cannot take THC?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that the way you worded that, whoever this person is, for whatever reason, they can't take THC. So the very simple answer would be yes, CBD has the potential to help. I obviously don't have a lot of details on what the issue is, but it's possible. maybe it's a PTSD issue. I would be more confident. Is it a structural deformity in the hippocampus or something like that? But very simply, I would say yes, the possibility is there. Some more information would be helpful though.
If they put more information, I'll let you know.
Okay, so first thing, CB1 and CB2 receptors. CBD modulates those, so regulates them to bring them in balance. Are you guys familiar with 5-HT1A? That's a serotonin receptor. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's closely linked with mood. It's also produced in your GI tract, which is very interesting. But serotonin acts on 5-HT1A. What are drugs that act on 5-HT1A? SSRIs like Prozac and Lexapro. CBD also acts on 5-HT1A as a mild agonist. And those SSRIs like Lexapro and Prozac are usually prescribed for mild anxiety or depression. And so that's why we also see CBD sometimes working for anxiety and depression. And in fact, those are two sections in our research library. Also, with the opioid receptors, CBD acts on those. And here's a term I'm going to throw out at you guys that's really big. It's called heterodimer. And so a heterodimer is where you have two different receptors closely linked. So it turns out that a lot of these opioid receptors that we have are heterodimers with endocannabinoid receptors. They're linked, and that's why we're seeing success with targeting the endocannabinoid system in pain. So also we can move to GABA. GABA is another neurotransmitter like 5-H or like serotonin. GABA is gamma aminobutyric acid. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It reduces electrical or slows electrical activity. Some drugs that act on GABA are the benzodiazepine class of drugs. People use those for anxiety, like Xanax or Klonopin or Valium, as well for epilepsy, something like Onfi or clobazam, or maybe a rescue medication like rectal or intranasal diastat. CBD does act on the GABAergic system too, and regulates it again. Glutamate is about the opposite of GABA. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter. We saw it on that previous slide. Higher levels of glutamate increase electrical firing and activity, possibly too much. So it's very important to control glutamate. And then, so we are electrochemical signaling systems. Some of the chemicals are like glutamate, GABA, serotonin, dopamine. And then the electrical part is the ions, calcium, sodium, potassium. Transient reaction potential of amyloid receptors are a little bit different, but are associated with this. And so the point being is that cannabis, and especially CBD, is a chemical that strongly interacts with many different systems, both electrically and chemically. And so we've touched on a few different things it does. CBD also interacts with adenosine and enhances it, which is an endogenous anti-inflammatory compound. So the point being is it's always working with your body. And then lastly, it works with other receptors. That's not an exhaustive list. And CBD can increase blood flow. It's a vasodilator and relaxant. But let's talk about this little chart right here. So here's a few things about the endocannabinoid system. It's a localized system. All of the compounds that we were talking about, like anandamide and 2-AG and NADA, they're all fat soluble. And we're water-based systems. So fat and water don't really mix. So when your endocannabinoid system is activated, it gets activated at a localized level. So if, let's say you have a broken bone right here, well, we have more cannabinoid receptors and messengers here to take care of that broken bone. Or in our brain, we're having a seizure. There's more receptors and messengers there. It's not like hormones. Hormones flow through the blood because they're water soluble and they can go throughout the body. Again, because these are fat, lipid soluble, not water soluble, it's a localized response. It's activated when it's needed, and it's a responsive system. It's a feedback system. So when we're talking about this chart of an axon terminal, a synapse in our nervous system, what happens is the electrical impulse travels down this way, and at the synapse it gets translated into a chemical message. Let's release glutamate, or let's release GABA, and it goes across the synaptic cleft, is taken up, and it is retranslated into an electrical message. The point here being is that these electrical and chemical messages flow one way, where the endocannabinoid system flows the other. So it's a retroactive feedback system. So whatever message is going, it's going to modify that message to make sure it's correct. So nerve cell is firing too much. Hey, nerve cell, slow down. Fire a little bit slower. Or maybe it's not firing fast enough. It's really slow. Hey, nerve cell, fire a little faster. Does that make sense? It balances things. And it's retroactive, localized and on demand, activated when you're out of balance or in a disease state. So somebody who's completely healthy might not have much expression or much reaction to a cannabis-based therapy as far as improvements go, because they're already in balance. And I'm going to read this one verbatim too, because I think it's very powerful. So in the past decade, the ECS endocannabinoid system has been implicated in a growing number of physiological functions, both in the central and peripheral nervous systems and in peripheral organs. More importantly, modulating, and that's where we go back to regulating, modulating, controlling, the activity of the ECS turned out to hold therapeutic promise in a wide range of disparate diseases and pathological conditions, ranging from mood and anxiety disorders, movement disorders such as Parkinson's and Huntington's, neuropathic pain, multiple sclerosis, spinal cord injury, cancer, atherosclerosis, like hardening of the arteries, myocardial infarction, fancy name for heart attack, right? Stroke, hypertension, glaucoma, obesity, metabolic syndrome, hello, diabetes, osteoporosis, to name just a few. So what I'm not saying here, I'm not saying that cannabis cures every disease out there. What I am saying is it's really nice that we have this plant that lets us not only study, but also tap into our own biological system that keeps us in balance. We can use this plant, and it's going to help us do more research and figure out more about this system that we're really just starting to learn more about. So again, cannabis doesn't cure everything, but for many people, it offers a chance or an opportunity at a better quality of life. And so here we're directly talking about epilepsy and drugs that are prescribed for certain ages and certain diagnoses. We see a lot of drugs here: topiramate, Keppra, levetiracetam, Depakote, valproic acid, phenytoin, dilantin, blah, blah, blah. What's missing here is the benzodiazepine class of drugs. Benzos are not prescribed, FDA approved for children. So I don't know if I said this, this is an FDA approved list of certain drugs for certain ages and certain conditions. And again, nowhere on here do you see benzodiazepines, but every day we talk to kids who are prescribed benzodiazepines as rescue meds. So the point here is that every single day doctors prescribe drugs for reasons that are not FDA approved. It's called an off-label prescription. And cannabis isn't FDA approved either. So just because something isn't FDA approved doesn't mean it can't help something, right? Whether it's cannabis or a medication that's prescribed for an off-label use. So right there, I'm just trying to illustrate to think for yourself a little bit outside of the box. Now we're going to cover the potential interaction chart.
If you could touch on Keppra specifically after this a little bit.
We're going to.
There was a question. Oh,
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's a new one.
All right, so we're going to go through this chart. Somebody asked for me to touch on Keppra, so I'm going to touch on Keppra. You're not going to see Keppra up here because these are all generic drug names. Kepra's a brand name. So the generic name of Keppra is levetiracetam. And so let's explain this chart in the context of levetiracetam. And so this red line is where we start. That's the baseline. That's how much of a drug is in your blood normally before you take CBD. Now let's say theoretically you take CBD and this drug at the same time. This is what might happen. For Keppra, it might increase the level of the drug in your blood, maybe 10%, maybe up to 50%. So a big increase in the blood level. And on average, that's the black line, 35% increase if you have an interaction. Now let's look at another drug, Depakote or valproate or sodium valproate or valproic acid. There's a lot of different names. But for this one, if you take it with CBD, well, yeah, on average, you're going to get a 25% increase, maybe a little bit more. In some people, it's even going to drop the level of the drug in their system. So as you can see with interactions, it's going to either cause the level of a drug to be raised or lowered in your system. Now, if the level of a drug is raised in your system, you might be more effective, great. Or on the other hand, maybe you have more side effects, or maybe you have some toxicity. If it's lowered, especially with AEDs, you might have more seizures because it's less effective. I extend this to any and all medications. I think it's about 60% of medications that have the potential to interact with CBD. So I make it simple and just say any and all medications, space it 2 to 4 hours away, give your liver one job at a time. Very simple way to avoid interactions on top of monitoring medications using doctors and pharmacists. And so we'll also take a brief moment to talk about quality. And I'll start by telling you guys about a research study we did in the quality department. We actually bought over 50 different CBD oils and pills and products off the internet with the criteria that they had to be clearly labeled as their contents. This pill is 100 milligrams, or this bottle has 1,000 milligrams. And so we sent all those products to a university, specifically the University of Pennsylvania, for laboratory analysis. And guess what? We found out that about 70% of those products were mislabeled as far as active ingredients go. 70%, that's really astounding, right? Some people had more than they said, some people had less than they said, some people $300 bottle of olive oil, some expensive olive oil. You know. And here's also some copies of FDA letters, cease and desist, because either A, your product, we tested it, doesn't have any CBD in it, snake oil, $300 bottle of olive oil, or guess what, we tested your product and it has 4 times the allowable amount of lead in it, heavy metal contaminants. So the problem with not only the medical marijuana industry, but the CBD or the hemp industry is that there's basically no regulation as far as federal oversight goes. So as a consumer, you have to be your own advocate and find high quality products. Not every product out there is created equal or is of high quality. And so on our website, you'll see that we work with a few companies. We've already vetted these companies. We've been to their grows. We've been to their labs. We know they use independent accredited laboratories that are third party to test their products for active ingredients and contaminants. That's why we only deal with 3 or 4 companies out of thousands. However, don't misconstrue this as me saying that you have to buy a product we support. We do have a document on our website when you log in under Client Resources called Quality of Product Matters. It's a checklist of questions that a consumer can ask before they buy a product. Things like, where was it grown? Oh, it was grown in China? No thanks. Oh, you tested it yourself as the manufacturer? That's a conflict of interest. No thanks. Oh, you used an independent third-party accredited laboratory and you have current batch results for active ingredients and contaminants for this exact bottle that I'm going to buy? Okay, great. So yeah, definitely, quality is a big question. Cannabis is safe. Nobody's ever died, but if you're not getting a consistent product, if you're getting a contaminated product, that opens the door for adverse events. You don't want to give a child who's battling cancer a bottle of CBD oil that's laced with fungus or some type of fungal toxin, of course. So the companies that we work with, they follow APA guidelines, that's American Herbal Products Association, current good manufacturing practices for their labs, and they self-regulate and use independent labs to test their products. There's a lot of great products out there. There's also bad ones out there. Definitely have to advocate for yourself. Now here we'll get a little bit more into interactions and side effects and some other fun stuff. So with side effects of CBD, they're virtually non-existent. There are signs that the dose is too high. Diarrhea, appetite loss, and sedation are reported commonly. Again, when the dose is too high. Usually reported when somebody isn't following dosing instructions. And up to 1.5 grams a day of CBD was reportedly well tolerated by a study done in 2011. That's exponentially more than most people will ever be taking, even people who are dosing extremely aggressively for cancer. So that says it's pretty safe. And also going to drug-drug interactions, CBD is metabolized in the liver by the cytochrome P450 super pathway and some of these sub-pathways like CYP2C9, C19, 3A4, etc. Like I said, most pharmaceuticals use these same pathways. So with any medication, with all medication, don't take it at the same time. Just give your liver one job at a time. That means a 2 to 4 hour window away from any and all meds. That's just playing it safe, crossing your T's, dotting your I's. Then on top of that, be aware of the side effects of your pharmaceuticals. If you start cannabis therapy and your side effects increase, suggestion you're having an interaction. Rely on doctors to measure your progress, especially if you want to get off medication eventually. Have your pharmacist be aware of what you're doing, all of that. You want professional support, of course. Again, going back to the safety of cannabis, there's actually no documented deaths from cannabis overdose. And again, that's in the history of humanity. But every 20 minutes, there's a pharma death in the US. And I think that's gone down to 12 in the past recently. I'm not saying pharmaceuticals are bad. Maybe we just need to be taught better how to store them or keep them away from kids or use them properly, or not take too many aspirin, right? So let's look at this one, the LD50 rating. Is anybody familiar with LD50 ratings? Acute lethal doses. So the LD50 for aspirin, I'll show you how to read it. So 1 aspirin, that's going to take all of our headaches away. We're going to be happy, right? 20 aspirin, and it's going to kill 50% of the people that take 20 aspirin. So it's also a ratio of a therapeutic to a lethal dose. But let me be very honest, they don't do these studies in people. They do them in rats and animals. It'd be kind of unethical if they did that with people.
I bet rats would feel that way too.
Exactly. But I don't know if anybody's asked one yet. So for aspirin, it's 1 in 20, but for cannabis, it's 1 in 20 to 40,000. So how do we picture that? Here's a fun way to visualize it. So somebody smokes 1 joint, right? Takes your pain away, helps you sleep, gets you high, whatever you want to say. So when somebody smokes 20 to 40,000 joints in one sitting, that's when they die.
Busy people.
Right. Yeah. So you get it. The point being is you cannot physically imbibe that much. You'll fall asleep first. There's actually a judge that worked with the D Drug Enforcement Agency in the 1980s, a judge by the name of Francis Young, and he surmised that in 15 minutes you would have to smoke 1,500 pounds of cannabis to kill yourself. In 15 minutes. I couldn't lift that much in a day, I don't think, much less inhale it. So again, they haven't killed any animals yet. They've tried, the animals fall asleep. It doesn't work. So yeah, cannabis is pretty safe, but if you're using it with medications, use some common sense, space it, be aware of side effects, have your doctors monitor your progress. But cannabis in general, not very dangerous. I can make some exceptions to that statement. So let's make some concluding statements on safety. It's not accurate that cannabis has no medical value or that information on safety is lacking. We have a ton of research, it's out there. So should cannabis be a first-line treatment? I would say for some people, yes, maybe. For other people, no, maybe not at all. And so here are some special considerations. People with a history of psychiatric illness in their family, a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia, for example, especially when we're talking about cannabis that is rich in THC, it's psychoactive, it will get you high, that can bring out latent schizophrenia. Now, it's not going to give you schizophrenia if you don't have already that genetic predisposition, but if it is there latently, it can be a factor that brings it out, just like anything else could, whether it's a stressful event in your life or something else. Adolescence as well, and this really has to do, again, with the psychoactive cannabis. I don't think teenagers should be getting high before high school or anything like that. Give me a break. And I think the data says that our minds are developing now until our mid-20s. So people really shouldn't be even using psychoactive substances at all until their mind is finished developing, and then there's an argument not even at all whatsoever. But anyway, adolescents shouldn't be smoking cannabis for fun. Now that's very different if you have a 15-year-old who's having 300 seizures a day and they need a quality of life, compared to somebody who's completely, perfectly, quote-unquote, healthy. And then the last consideration would be for pregnant nursing women, and here's why. The jury's still out. Cannabis compounds can cross through the placenta into the fetus, and they are transferred from the breast milk into, say, an infant's mouth. So there is going to be some transfer. What we really don't know is the development of the body's endocannabinoid system. When and how does it happen? Does it happen when we're in a fetus? Does it happen as we're growing? And so we don't know if adding these plant cannabinoids while the system is still developing, will it somehow damage the system down the line or stop the development or its full function? We don't know. One study that would suggest the opposite of that would suggest that this is completely safe, and this is on our research library, is a study they did in Jamaica. These women in Jamaica, they followed them for 5 years. They started when they were pregnant, and they stopped the study at 5 years, and I'll tell you why. But so these women were actually, as you can imagine, the culture of Jamaica, they were using high THC cannabis while they were pregnant to help with things like morning sickness and nausea. And so their kids were born, and they studied these kids for 5 years. All the kids were fine, completely normal. And at 5 years, the study funding got cut off because guess who was funding it? NIDA. NIDA is the National Institute for Drug Abuse. And in 5 years, all these kids were great, doing completely normal. No problems, no harm. And so they said, we're not going to fund this anymore. This isn't what we wanted to see. And so that's how that study ended. But again, I'm not coming out and saying explicitly or giving permission or anything like that for a pregnant or a nursing woman to use cannabis under any circumstances. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is if you want to do your own research and make your own opinion, you can do that because it's your body. I'm not condoning it under any circumstances because, again, the jury's still out. We don't know for sure. You know, does this mess up the endocannabinoid system and it doesn't manifest until you're 30? We just don't know. So one can make their own educated decision. And now we're going to get into administration. So let's flash back to that visualization I said of somebody smoking a joint, right? When I first moved out to Colorado, that's what I thought or envisioned that medical cannabis was. You know, somebody smoking a joint and saying, I'm better. So right now I encourage you to take that image, crumble it up, and throw it in the trash. That's really anachronistic. It's in the past. We're in the 21st century now. We have 21st century pharmaceutical and medical and therapeutic practices, and we're able to apply these to cannabis now. So actually smoking cannabis is the crudest and least healthy form of actually intaking or imbibing it. Burn anything and it creates carcinogens. So one very simple way around that is vaporization. Vaporization is not a chemical change, it's just a physical change from a solid or a liquid state to a gaseous state. It avoids creating those carcinogens. And going back to cannabis, it has a few hundred compounds, let's say 300 to 500 roughly. Once you burn it, you bump that up to about 2,000 compounds, right? Some of which are necessarily going to be carcinogenic, and that's no good. So vaporization, again, easy way to avoid those carcinogens. And vaporization is also great for rapid relief. It's an acute administration method, delivery from lungs to the bloodstream to the brain and throughout the body. So also systemic delivery. So for somebody, why would you use vaporization? Maybe if you have a panic attack and you need rapid relief, or if you have extreme pain and you need rapid relief. Anything, nausea, you know, and you need rapid relief. Anything where you need rapid, quick relief. It's not going to be the best long-term solution. You might have to dose multiple times during the day because it leads to a very quick and high blood level and then also rapid metabolization. But it can be very handy. And then we move to topical. So topical it's not systemic, it doesn't go throughout your whole body. It's a localized application. So localized, what I mean is, if you're using a topical, you might be saying, I have arthritis on my knuckles, or on my hips, or on my knees. I'm going to put a topical right on the site where I have pain. Or for other dermatological issues, maybe things like eczema or psoriasis, I have a patch of psoriasis right here. I'm going to put some topical on. Or I have some eczema on the inside. I'm going to put a topical on. Right where you need it at the spot. Transdermal technology has also been developed. So that's something like this Mary's CBD patch, where it has extended release technology. It'll release 10 milligrams of CBD through 8 to 12 hours, a very discreet way to dose. I've seen people use transdermal patches who might have certain types of pain, maybe back pain, and they put it right on their back. Transdermal patch can also be put on any venous area, such as a wrist, an ankle, a back of a knee. Those are also options. And you can even cut those guys into squares or strips and see if a smaller portion doesn't work. Again, a very discreet way to dose throughout the day. You know, somebody who has PTSD or anxiety might put a patch on and they don't have to worry about taking capsules or oils in front of their coworkers. So great extended release, discreet way to dose. I was mentioning CBN for sleep. These guys also have a CBN patch, which, you know, extended release, help you stay asleep all night. And then there's rectal administration. I view that more as a European thing. And there's some conflicting information. Anecdotally, we've heard of good absorption rates, but I've also heard a doctor say that cannabis isn't absorbed very well rectally, so jury's still out on that. One context, another one for rectal administration would be when you dose THC rectally, it reduces the psychoactivity compared to if you would have taken that same dose orally. When you take THC orally, say in an edible or an oil, it hits your liver and your liver converts delta 9 THC into 11-hydroxy THC, which is stronger and more potent. And that's why if you live here in Colorado, you hear the news about all these tourists coming out here and eating edibles and then going to the emergency room. It's because they aren't expecting such a strong and long, deep psychoactive feeling, and they start freaking out and they call the emergency room. Really nothing to worry about, but it can be distressing if you overdose on THC. Not fatal, but anxiety and paranoia and other scared thoughts can come into that realm. But again, rectal administration reduces the psychoactivity. So especially if somebody has cancer and they're trying to follow a Rick Simpson-like protocol of dosing extremely aggressively with THC, they might choose rectal administration to get more in their system while still avoiding that high, for example. Now as well, liquid products like oils, say the Charlotte's Web, can be dosed through a G tube, a J tube, a PEG, a Mickey button, all of those gastronomy types of instruments that help with people who don't eat or drink by mouth. And then capsules and sublingual, I think those are the two biggest backbones of somebody's therapy. So capsules and sublingual administration, that's going to deliver, again, everything systemically. It's the inside-out, whole brain, whole body solution. As well, with sublingual oils and capsules, in the long run, you're able to deliver more to your system if you need it. So for example, you can have a capsule that has 100 milligrams. In one puff, it might be hard to vaporize 100 milligrams, if that makes sense. So it's practical with capsules and sublingual oils to get to higher doses if necessary, consistently. One advantage with sublingual, though, is absorption and bioavailability. So if you hold a liquid under your tongue or in your cheeks or in your gums, that's called buccal administration, for 30 seconds to a minute, maybe more, some will go directly to your bloodstream. Now if you swallow a capsule, it has to go to your stomach. Acid breaks some down, goes through your intestines, your liver, that breaks some down. And after a few hours, maybe it finally reaches your bloodstream. So with capsules, a lower bioavailability, you're actually getting less out of it, and it takes longer to reach your system. Now, an example where capsules might be more convenient, say somebody with Parkinson's who their hands are shaking really bad and they can't measure out the oil, it's not practical. Well, capsule's much more convenient. Another con with that is going to be with capsules, you are forced to change the dose in an incremental manner. You can only add or take away a capsule. With an oil, you could add or take away something as small as a drop, and so you can change the dose in a nuanced manner if necessary. And so going all over these different administration methods, I think in summary, the method you choose, or plural methods, depends upon yourself, your situation, and what's going on. So somebody with, say, maybe some sleep, arthritis, and anxiety issues, they're using the topical as needed in the spots where they have pain. For their anxiety when it flares up, maybe they're using a vaporizer, and regularly, vaporizer as needed, topical as needed, but regularly, consistently, capsules or oils for a baseline level of relief. Somebody with epilepsy, maybe they're just doing the oil, so your symptoms, what you choose, combination of administration methods, sometimes it's a combo that works the best. You gotta think about it in context. And so here's some examples of our dosing charts. So very simple. We say to stay on a dose for roughly a month. That was a tongue twister. Roughly a month. And here's why. We also suggest dosing more than once a day to cover the half-life. So when you dose cannabis once a day, your body's pretty good at eliminating it overnight. You basically start over every day. But when you dose 2 or 3 times daily, basically you're adding the compounds faster than your body can eliminate them, and it builds up slowly. So carrying a dose for a month, every day and every week after, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, you're always having more in your system. And so the thought is that during that time it might build up and become adequate. You might not have to increase it, and that's good because why would you take more if you don't need to? It also save you money. And so the idea as well is that we're starting at really low doses and increasing very slowly. We're doing this because we know these low starting doses are going to work for some people, right? Not everybody, but we're going to catch those people at the beginning. And those other people, they're going to move up slowly and they're going to eventually get there. So this slow and steady schedule is a conservative way to eventually reach the dose that is best for you. And you'll never take too much. And that's important too, and we'll touch on that. But again, talk to doctors and pharmacists about interaction, monitoring, medication levels, things like that. And slow and steady wins the race.
Is that on your website, that?
This,
Yes.
it looks a little different.
Okay, but
It's on our dosing page.
Okay, cool.
It's definitely not going to look the same as the slide, but it'll have basically all of that information. And so, why slow and steady? First, cannabis exhibits what is called a bell curve or a biphasic effect. The way I like to say this is Goldilocks. Too hot, too cold, just right. So what the bell curve or biphasic effect means is if your dose is too low, that's not going to help you. You're not going to see any results. Now, on the other hand, if your dose is too high, there's actually a few conditions where that's going to exacerbate symptoms. So if you have epilepsy and you're taking too much, you might have more seizures. If you have anxiety and you take too much CBD or THC, more anxiety. Neuropathic pain, it might actually increase neuropathic pain. So those are a few reasons why you don't want to take too much. Slow and steady. You'll eventually get there. And also, we have the Herxheimer reactions. Is anybody familiar with Herxheimer reactions? Okay, I'm going to explain the Herxheimer. So a Herxheimer reaction is when somebody has bad bacteria in their body. Say like Lyme disease, you get bitten by a tick, transfers Borrelia spirochetes, and they start burrowing into your body. That's not fun. And also PANS or PANDAS, that's a subset diagnosis of the autism spectrum, and it stands for pediatric autoimmune and neuropsychiatric disorders due to a streptococcal infection. Keyword there is streptococcal infection. Just like Lyme, different bacteria. And flashing back to that chart of properties, we saw antibacterial on a few of these compounds. And so the point being, if somebody has bad bacteria in their body, you introduce cannabis with its antibacterial properties, and there's some evidence that cannabis kills MRSA too, that hospital bacteria that's resistant to a bunch of antibiotics. But anyway, you introduce cannabis, or an antibiotic, for example, like they do in Lyme disease, and it kills these bacteria. They die, they release neurotoxins, and that exacerbates symptoms. So in somebody with Lyme, it might be flu-like symptoms or pain or inflammation. Now somebody on the autism spectrum, it's more likely going to manifest as increased unwanted and undesired behaviors because they're having these symptoms, they're having trouble communicating what's going on, they're not feeling good, so you have behavioral outbursts. So the point being there is that I've seen parents, and I've talked to them, digging out the details. Okay, what's going on with your kid? CBD wasn't working, it made their behavior worse. Oh, are they on the spectrum? Oh, do they have PANDAS? Oh, yeah, they do. Well, actually, it wasn't making your kid worse, it was killing the bacteria, and that was the real cause. So you should have backed down on the dose and went a little bit slower. You got that Herxheimer reaction a little bit too strong. Is that making sense? So two specific contexts where it's very important to go slow. The Herxheimer reaction can actually kill somebody if you have an extensive enough bacterial infection, say stage 5 Lyme. But other than that, slow and steady, and you'll get there. Finding your subjective therapeutic dose. And like I was saying earlier, there's no one dose or one product fits all. Everybody's different. So you have to find what works best for you. And so let's talk about reasonable expectations for a moment. It can take months to weeks or months. I spoke with somebody recently following our dosing guideline, an adult female with migraines. It took her 4 months to work up to a dose that helped. And at that point, she went migraine free. But it took her 4 months to get there. And that's the thing. If you're increasing the dose once a month, it is a very slow way to get there. It can take time. Patience is definitely important. There are those people who are rapid responders, though. And so give it time. 6 months is usually where we say is an adequate trial period. If you haven't seen anything in 6 months, okay, let's try something else. You're not always going to see something overnight. It's not an overnight snap of the finger solution. To be honest, really the best outcomes in cannabis-based therapy, CBD, THC, all of it, they're really in the long run. Doing labs, titrating slowly up, like I said, that slow step-up schedule for dosing. And so what does success mean to you, Is it your kid sleeping in their own bed? Do you have low enough pain to actually get out the door? Can you go see a movie with your friends because you're not anxious? A lot of different ways to define success and think about what that means to you. And then also measure your progress. We've actually had the situation happen where people call us several months after starting CBD saying, hey, this isn't doing anything, I'm going to stop. Okay. And they stop and they call us back and say, well, I stopped and then I realized it was helping me. So you want to track your progress because a lot of the times with this, as you're moving up slowly and approaching that dose, results and improvements are also appearing subtly and slowly, maybe at an unnoticeable level for the individual. So maybe you keep a journal or you chart your pain level every day, or you rate your sleep or how many anxiety attacks or seizures you have. Maybe it's an online tool, a phone app, like I said, a notebook, some other type of system, but just make sure you're tracking your progress. You don't want to pop up 6 months later and say, I think it's working, but I'm not sure. And then lastly, we have a chart of a half-life. It takes roughly 5 half-lives to eliminate a substance from the body. So I go over this just to illustrate that when we're dosing multiple times a day, we're catching this curve up here, and we're extending it out. And so the more we dose consistently multiple times a day, the longer this will stay in our system and be there at a plateau level, in an even, consistent level. The same, that's why you test positive for THC with time, is it just builds up and builds up in your fat cells. It's not excreted quickly. And then lastly, we'll do some further reading, some great books here. The two easiest ones to read are going to be The Medicinal Power of Cannabis by John Hicks and Cannabis Revealed by Bonnie Goldstein. She's a world-renowned cannabis physician out of LA. And John Hicks' book is also very readable. And then we have the Cannabis Health Index by Hugh Bleshing, who's a PhD. That's a very interesting book because what he does is it's an alphabetized book, alphabetized by condition, say arthritis, fibromyalgia, cancer, all of those things. And what he does is for every single condition, he compiles research studies that were done about that condition in cannabis. And he goes through those research studies, and then he gives that condition a 1 to 5 star rating based on how likely it is that cannabis will or will not help. So maybe arthritis has a 5-star rating, meaning, yeah, cannabis is really great for it. But something else, IBS, 3-star rating, we're not sure, if that makes sense. So it's really great. And then last, we have Cannabis Evolution and Ethnobotany. That's where I was talking about the indica and sativa and all the archaeobotany and all of that. This is a graduate level text. It doesn't have a lot of practical information as far as dosing or usage or anything. But if you're interested in exactly that, Cannabis Evolution and Ethnobotany, it is a great read. But again, very high-level text. We're good on books? Okay. Yeah, a lot of good reading there. Probably even Google some of it and get a free PDF, who knows. And so Dr. Warren Davinsky, interesting character right here. A few years ago, he said, for patients who have had little success in treating their seizures with other medications, CBD could be a last resort. He went on to help develop Epidiolex, so now he wants to sell it to you as your first resort. And that's good, There's going to be people who they can't access a lot of the products that we deal with because these products are dietary supplements and they're not covered by insurance. And so there are going to be some families out here in the United States who they can only access CBD through insurance-covered Epidiolex. And if that helps their kid, then that's great. And I'm happy if it helps one person. That's what it's all about. And then Dr. John Gaetanis, we met him at Harvard a year and a half ago. He said cannabis could be a new therapy for any intractable condition. So what I'm trying to illustrate right here with these last two doctor comments is, again, a paradigm shift. Doctors every single day, more and more, are opening their minds to learning about this and becoming educated about it, telling their patients about it or referring their patients to this or that person if they can't do it themselves. We see it every day. More and more people, I've been here for 3 years on those, more and more people call us and say, my doctor told me to call you, my neurologist wanted me to call you and reach out to you because they can't say anything about CBD, but they told me you can. So there's a huge paradigm shift going on. All the doctors who are reading the research, they're open to cannabis. So if your doctor's not open to cannabis, he's either too busy that he can't read the research, or he or she's ignoring it. That's about the only two options. And so again, if anybody donated, I want to thank you. And if you do want to donate, I'll thank you in advance. We appreciate it. It's going to our financial aid program and keeping all these services free so we can help people all over the world. So thank you. And I hope everybody here enjoyed. I hope everybody at home enjoyed. And I hope you learned something. And maybe didn't find it too boring or fall asleep. If you have any comments, type them in and tell me how I did. Criticism is invited. And if you want to volunteer, we're taking volunteers everywhere, even in the Philippines. RoC.us/volunteer. You'll talk to Megan. She's very nice. She's our volunteer coordinator. Yeah, if you're interested in contributing, there's a lot of people can do. And also, lastly, if you guys have any questions, always call one of us. Go to our site, RoC.us. It's great. It has a lot of resources. You can call us 719-347-5400, extension 1 or 123 if you want to talk to me. And you can email us info@RoC.us or John, John, @RoC.us. Questions, criticisms, whatever it may be, let us know. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for joining in today.